Hi Year 4, Chapter 27, Esker. When the Erkin bears pulled back from their circle and gathered together a little way from the group, Esker opened her rucksack and shared round the grayling and boiled eggs Jay had packed for them. She knew the Erkin bears were on her side, but something about their size and smell made Esker and her friends eat with one eye on their food and one eye on the bears. Only Pebble seemed unfazed by their presence, chomping and burping his way through his meal as if he was indulging in a feast in deep roots. The afternoon sun burned through the clouds, and Esker knew that this break in the weather was just what they needed to travel north. She glanced at the tusk sleds, smashed to pieces by the fight, but the Ice Queen's anthem had gone quiet for a while, and without it droning on, Esker found that she could think more clearly. "We need to find the grey man," she whispered, "but we've got no way of getting north, other than walking." Blue scoffed. "Bears!" Flint shook his head. "They're not for riding, Blue. The wild's not like that." The group watched as 5 of the Erkin bears sloped away, spreading out in all directions over the ice, until just Whitefur and one other bear remained. "I wonder," Esker whispered. She stood up and walked towards the 2 Erkin bears. Then she leant in close to Whitefur. She didn't use words. Somehow it didn't feel right, in the same way that if you were going to climb a mountain, you wouldn't stop to ask its permission. Instead, she ran a hand down the bear's neck, then scooped a fistful of fur into her hand. Whitefur dipped his head and Esker hauled herself onto his back. And as Esker sat astride the Erkin bear, she remembered Whitefur's words inside the giant's beard. "Your voice has the power to silence the tribes, command animals, and shake the skies." And she smiled. She had silenced the tribes, well, one of them anyway, and now she was commanding the animals. She squinted into the sun. Suddenly shaking the skies didn't seem quite so impossible after all. Grabbing his sackful of feathers, Flint edged over to the second Erkin bear with Blue. He gave a polite little bow, then glanced at his sister. "I think you should curtsy before you climb up." Blue looked disgusted. "Wild not like that, Flint." And seizing the bear's fur, she hoisted herself up. Wedging Pebble into his hood, Flint climbed on after her. Then he slotted the sack into Blue's lap and wrapped one arm round it and his little sister, and clung on to the Erkin bear's neck with his other. "They'll take us to the grey man," Esker whispered. She glanced at Balafan soaring above them. Then she looked across to Flint. "Ready?" Pebble barked and Flint gave a shaky nod. "Ready!" The Erkin bears lumbered forward, pounding over the ice with their giant paws, and at first Esker jostled round on the bear's back, desperately trying to stay upright. It was only when she raised her knees so that she was bent low over Whitefur's neck that she found the bear's rhythm. And then she didn't move like a girl, but like a wild thing, pressed close to the heart of beasts. So this was what it felt like to move like a bear, Esker thought, to swallow the ground underfoot rather than stumble breathlessly across it. She grinned. It was like running with the strength of a waterfall on her side. On and on the bears raced, over ridges of snow, across iced rivers, and through copses of white winter bare trees, while Balafan flew ahead above. They never tired, never slowed, never stopped once. Eventually the coast came into view. "The groaning splinters," Flint murmured as they neared the snow-blasted cliff tops. "We're close to the tusk territory now." From the Erkin bears' backs, Esker, Flint and Blue looked at the giant icebergs, floating like half-toppled houses on the turquoise sea. Esker shivered. Further east, along the coast, and thankfully out of sight from where they now stood, were the Tusk tribe's igloos and the cursed iceberg that was Winterfang Palace. Esker slipped from Whitefur's back onto the snow. The cliffs in front of her dropped vertically to the sea. Their only hope down from them was if they found the grey man. But as Esker looked around, she could see no sign of a tall man who had braved many winters out on the northern coast at all. She walked round to face Whitefur and held his heavy jaw in her hands. "Where is the grey man?" she whispered. "Do you know?" She half hoped that Whitefur would show his human form and trade words instead of grunts, but the wild never bent the way that you wanted it to. Whitefur rubbed his head into Esker's shoulder, and she knew that this was his goodbye for now, that he'd taken her to the right place, and that it was up to her. Flint and Blue had to do the rest. "Thank you," she whispered again from the din of the kittiwakes and guillemots chattering from the cliffs. "I wish my words were louder so that I could really tell you how grateful I am." Whitefur stood on the cliff top with Esker. Then he dipped his head, and together with the second bear, he hastened back across the ice into the heart of Erkenwald once again. Balafan swooped down and landed on Esga's shoulder. "It won't be long before the Ice Queen steals your voice completely," Flint said to Esga, "and just 2 days until the midnight sun rises. So where on earth is this grey man?" "Over here," came a tart reply. Esga jumped. The voice belonged to a man with a high, almost squeaky, weedy voice, which might have gone unnoticed had Flint been talking more loudly. "Well, don't just stand there gawping," the voice squeaked. "I've got a headache, a broken leg, a sore back, and a sprained knee. I very obviously need help." Blue clutched Flint's hands. "Who's this? Who's there?" The voice came again, even higher and crosser than before. "No one comes my way for almost a year, and then you three show up like a trio of gaping buffoons." There was a sigh. "I'm right under your noses, you know." Esga glanced at the little mound of snow in front of her. "You don't think—" Balafan leapt down from her shoulder, and Esga brushed a handful of snow aside to reveal a heap of small rocks. The reedy voice sounded again. It was louder this time, and it came straight from the rocks themselves. "Why are humans always so confoundedly stupid?" Flint stared at the rocks. How can they be speaking?" "Like this," the voice snapped. Blue bent down and lifted up a long, thin rock. "Do you mind?" the voice muttered. "That's my arm." Esga's eyes widened. Jay's words about the grey man, she forced her voice on. "He'll be in pieces in light of what's been going on. In pieces. The grey man is literally in pieces." The rocks looked decidedly fed up, if rocks could look that way. "Clever clogs." Flint blinked. "The Ice Queen must have torn him down in the battle. Maybe we need to help build him back up into a person so he can help us." The voice sighed. "Yes, you do. Before the sun sets, too, because I have absolutely no confidence in your working in the dark." There was a pause. "So would you be so kind as to pass me my arm?" Ignoring the grey man's demands, Flint lifted an oval rock from the pile and placed it in the snow. "This could be a face," he murmured, "if you squint at it hard enough." "Of course, it's my face, you bumbling idiot," the voice from inside the rock barked. Balafan raked her talons across a rounder rock. "Do be careful, that's my bottom. It's gone rather numb after all this lying down in one place, but I'm still fond of it. In fact, I'd say it's one of my best features." Down on their hands and knees, Esga, Flint and Balafan and Blue and even Pebble worked as quickly as they could to piece the grey man back together. "Put your back into it," the rock squeaked. Put my back into it, and my hands. I'll be needing them if you want me to help you." And although the conversation was somewhat stressful, and Blue seemed determined to place the grey man's foot on top of his head, and Pebble spent far too much time using his tail to flick stones at Flint's bottom, they did, eventually, manage to cobble together a figure with the rocks. There was a moment of silence as the group looked at their creation, arranged in the snow. "Now what?" Flint hissed. The grey man lay there in vague shape of a man. His face was a blank stone still. There was no mouth, no nose, no eyes, and yet the creaky voice came again. "Now this," it chuckled. "Finally this!" And as he spoke, the snow around him whipped up into a flurry. Then the stones began to move. They ground together like rusty joints. Then the grey man stood up, and on the stone that was his head, a face showed. An old, wrinkled face, carved into the rock itself and spotted with lichen. 2 grey eyes blinked. "Am I tall and splendid?" Esga squinted. The man came up to her knee. "But the Feather Tribe song," Flint mumbled as he glanced towards the grey man. "It said he was tall, and he needs to be if he's going to help us find our way down to the cliffs to the Frosthorn." There was an awkward pause. "I knew it," the grey man wailed. "I'm small, aren't I?" He raised a rocky palm to his forehead. "Oh, dismantle my legs, lop off my head, cast me off the edge of the cliff." Blue reached out a hand and patted him on the head. "You being silly now." "That wretched Ice Queen," the grey man snivelled. "When she cast me down, she stripped me of my devilishly attractive height. She said there was no room for giants in her Erkenwald." Flint's jaw hardened. "Well, this isn't her Erkenwald. It's ours." And this time Esga didn't have to prompt Flint to rummage through his rucksack for an invention. He ripped the bag open and pulled out a stoppered bottle. Under the fading light, Esga saw a jet-black liquid within the glass that every now and again flickered gold. "What's that?" the grey man asked suspiciously. Bottled lightning, Flint replied. A few drops can drastically increase an object's size or speed. Are you sure, boy? The grey man wagged his finger at Flint. Because I might have an allergy to it, and I really don't want... Blue, it appeared, didn't have much patience with the grey man's allergies, and, before he could get any more words out, she grabbed the bottle from Flint and began tipping the liquid over him. Flint snatched the bottle back before she could drain the whole thing. I need the rest of it for something important, Blue. Something else. For a few seconds, nothing happened, and then the grey man gasped. He was growing before their very eyes. The rocks that formed his body swelled to become boulders. The stones that were his fingers stretched out into plinths, and the rock that was his head grew until it was as big as a door. The grey man cricked his neck, and his voice came forth in a deep boom. I had forgotten how splendid it feels to be a giant. Blue patted Flint on the back. You best inventor. Flint beamed. We've come for the frost horn, Esker whispered to the grey man. Well, of course you have. I didn't think you'd drop by with the Erkenbears for a cup of tea. So how do we get down to the shore without dying? Flint asked. The grey man waved a hand casually. Oh, it's just a hop, a skip and a jump. Would you like to ride on my shoulder or my head? Both will be equally uncomfortable.